But the bottom line is Bill Cosby is going to leave prison today because, according to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, he was granted a deal to come talk to prosecutors. They used that evidence against him, and that is unconstitutional. The court saying that Bill Cosby was, quote, operating under the reasonable belief that the prosecutor decided not to prosecute him, and that when a future prosecutor in the same case decided to do so, that was against his Fifth Amendment constitutional rights against self-incrimination because he'd already talked to prosecutors. I want to bring in our Aaron Katersky, who's been covering this case for us. And Aaron, it is a somewhat technical issue, but an important one. Everybody's got a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The court finding that Bill Cosby's Fifth Amendment right was violated by prosecuting him, and the whole conviction has to be overturned.
For a split Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, the highest court in Pennsylvania, Terry, this is really a matter of fundamental fairness and due process. For reasons that the court details in a 79-page opinion, they say that when a prosecutor makes an unconditional promise of non-prosecution, that must be adhered to. Bill Cosby had entered into this agreement with a previous prosecutor. Then a new DA came along in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and opted to bring these sex assault charges. And when he did, the court said prosecutors, yes, have discretion, but cannot undermine fundamental fairness and due process. And the only remedy, the court said, Terry, is to allow Bill Cosby to leave prison, which he will do after serving about 2 years of his sentence.
It is just an extraordinary development. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania overturning Bill Cosby's conviction because of this previous deal that Cosby had made with a previous prosecutor. The court saying that because of that deal, this prosecution resulting in his conviction must be overturned. And I want to go to Lindsay Davis, ABC News Live prime anchor, and who's been on this case from the beginning as well. And Lindsay, your reaction here and what you think of how the court approached this tangled web of Cosby's interactions with the Montgomery County, Pennsylvania prosecutor's office.
You know, I have to say, Terry, I'm not shocked because when you watched the Pennsylvania Supreme Court when they did their virtual hearing several months ago now, they really were having quite a sticking point with this issue as far as the fact that Bruce Castor had given his word, had made a promise. I mean, there was some question about the fact that there was never any evidence that they could ever find this promise that was in writing. But you could tell that they were really grappling with it, and it didn't seem that they were convinced that this was the accurate assessment or conclusion was that he should have been found guilty and put in prison and even tried based on that agreement with Bruce Castor. Did talk to Brian McMonagle, who was Cosby's attorney in that first trial that ended up being a hung trial. His reaction, wow. About 7 times at the beginning of the phone call was just wow. The next word out of his mouth was unbelievable. And he said if he had bail pending appeal, he never would have served a day, and he felt that would have been the right reaction at that time. Of course, Bruce Castor did take the witness stand in that first trial. He was presented by Brian McMonagle and the defense team. And Castor, when he took the stand, he owned that commitment. He owned that promise that he had made to Bill Cosby. But again, they just were not able to have any evidence that it was ever put into writing.
And so that's what the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania did. They took those conversations between Bill Cosby and the first prosecutor in this case, and they said that, in effect, Cosby agreed to talk to the prosecutor on the understanding that he would not be prosecuted for his answering questions. In other words, he was waiving his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination by doing that original interview with prosecutors. And the court's saying here that it is a reasonable conclusion that Cosby reached, that he wouldn't be prosecuted for what he told them. And now the Supreme Court saying that the subsequent prosecution brought by a different prosecutor, it's unconstitutional, and it must be tossed out. Now, all of this, of course, one of the landmark cases of the Me Too movement. More than 60 women had come forward alleging various sexual indecencies and assaults and drug-induced sexual activity. They say that Bill Cosby was responsible for and and in fact perpetrated on them, that dating back to the mid-1960s. Among the women who came forward to lay charges against Bill Cosby, Victoria Valentino. She was not part of this Pennsylvania case, but Victoria Valentino joins us now. And Victoria, now on the one case that he did stand trial for, where the statute of limitations had not run, Bill Cosby's conviction overturned. If I could just get your basic reaction to this after you and so many other women came forward, and what your story was, Victoria.
Well, I'm just absolutely in shock. I had no idea. I hadn't been watching television this morning. I am on the West Coast. I'm just getting up and getting moving for the day, and suddenly I'm getting all these phone calls, so I haven't really had time to process it, except for the fact that my stomach is lurching, and I am deeply distressed about the injustice of the whole thing. You know, he's a sociopath. He's a serial rapist. And the fact that he had a relationship with Bruce Castor, I believe Bruce Castor's father or brother-in-law or someone was the realtor who helped Bill Cosby find and purchase his Cheltenham mansion. So they had a personal relationship, and I don't know that that has really been brought to the fore, and it just seems that that should be mentioned and discussed and considered. You know, that compromises everything, in my personal opinion. Perhaps not constitutionally, I don't know. But you know, this is a man who has no conscience. He has no sense of remorse. We just got a letter saying that his parole was denied. And we were going, yeah, thank God. You know, after he had gotten his appeal hearing on the 1st of December, I watched it, and I felt initially that there were a couple of the justices that totally triggered all my predator PTSD, and there was one woman justice that said, well, I just don't see a pattern here. They were trying to use the fact that they had brought in 5 of my sister Cosby survivors as testament to his prior bad acts. And they were trying to dismiss that. Well, how else do you prove that someone is a serial predator, a serial rapist, a serial murderer, a serial abuser? You have to show the other people that he has abused. And he after I went public, after all of this stuff came down, I got so many stories from so many other people, and it was well known. I have a friend who told me, who grew up in Bel Air, California, that as a teenage boy and a young, handsome actor, by Barbara Stanwyck and Betty Davis, never to go to the Cosby's house without eating and drinking first, and never to take anything from them to eat or drink. It was well known.
And Victoria Valentino, as one of these scores of women who have come forward to speak your truth and tell a story, we thank you. Stay with us for a minute. I do want to go to ABC News legal analyst, chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams. Dan, this is a confusing moment. You have followed this story. What do you make of what the court did here? How would you explain it?
Yeah. Let's talk about what the court did do and what it didn't do, right? What it didn't do is it didn't declare that Bill Cosby didn't do this, right? This is not a statement by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that Bill Cosby is innocent. They're deciding a legal question here. And there were 2 broad legal questions they were deciding. The most important one is the one that you've been talking about. Is this deal, this promise, how definitive it was is at issue, that the previous prosecutor had made to Cosby that he wouldn't be prosecuted. Why is that so important? It's not just important because the previous prosecutor had made the promise. It's important because Bill Cosby then relied on that, he says, to agree to do a civil deposition in the case when he was then sued. And so his comments that he made in connection with the civil case were then used against him in the criminal case. His argument is, I never would have done that interview. I never would have agreed to be deposed if I thought it was still possible that I could be prosecuted criminally. So that became critical evidence against Bill Cosby in the context of this case, those statements that he made. The other question that the court was evaluating, again, is another one we've been touching on, is the number of other women that were allowed to testify. And there are always legal debates. In the first trial, where there was a hung jury, only one other woman was allowed to testify. In the second trial, when he was convicted, it was 5. And there are questions about, can you demonstrate that this was definitively a pattern? And again, that's not as much a common sense question as it is a legal one. So I think it's important when looking at this to know that what the court has done here is made a legal evaluation on those 2 questions and not a factual assessment of the case against Bill Cosby.
Got it. Thank you very much for that. And we all have a right against our own words being used against us, and that is what this case turns on. But I do want to go back to the human truth of the matter and bring in Janice Baker-Kinney, who is one of the women who did come forward to allege and accuse Bill Cosby. And Janice, I understand that you were 24 years old when, as you say, he sexually assaulted you. Here he has been now in prison 2 years, and he will be released today because of this Supreme Court of Pennsylvania decision. And what's your reaction?
Well, I'm being bombarded by text messages and phone calls from friends and media outlets, and it's taken me a little bit of time to absorb all this so quickly. So at this very moment, all I could say is I'm stunned, I'm shocked, and my stomach's kind of in a knot over this. Just one little legal ease can overturn this when so many people came forward, so many women have told their truths, and this serial rapist gets to go home today is just stunning to me.
But you were, as you say, part of a revolution, really, in our country, of women coming forward to speak about men in power and what they had done. That remains, doesn't it, what you and others achieved?
Well, it certainly does. What's interesting is early this morning, a friend called me who asked me if I wouldn't mind speaking to a group of women who came forward about recent events with the mayor of Windsor, California, who's been accused of being a serial rapist as well, and asked me, because of what I've done in the past and spoke my truth, if I could speak to this group of women as well. And I was just telling her, going through everything I did, speaking my truth out to the public, and then being one of the 5 witnesses on the stand for the trial has emboldened me and made me stronger. And I would love to speak to these women about their truths and coming forward and standing up for other women and other survivors. And not 5 minutes after I hung up the phone, this news came out, and it just kind of burst my bubble a little bit about all the things that our group has done and helped other women with. And I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar. We will take care of these type of men that use their power. And I'm feeling very deflated right now.
Well, that is completely understandable. But Janice, you and the others clearly did have a huge impact on our country, and that remains. And we thank you for being with us today, and wish you good luck on this as you go forward in this work.
I appreciate that. Thank you, too.
Thanks. And I want to bring in our own Sunny Hostin, who's co-host of The View and a former prosecutor herself. A lawyer has had a lot of experience in this area of law in particular. And Sunny, what do you make of what's happened and the kind of impact that we just heard Janice and Victoria Valentino talk about for the victims who did have the courage to come forward and now see this conviction overturned?
Well, I am certainly concerned that this may have a chilling effect on victims and survivors of sexual assault coming forward. Rape and sexual assault are the least reported crimes in our country, and that is in large part because women feel that they will not be believed. They do feel that they will be eaten up by the process. And so it is not surprising to me that survivors and victims are feeling dismayed and disappointed in this process. I will say this. This is a win for Bill Cosby. The conviction was overturned. So it is as if he was never convicted. It is as if he was not found guilty. And in reading the tea leaves, I think many attorneys in the sex crime space, like I am, thought that this could happen because when the appeal was being argued in front of the court's 7 justices, a lot of the justices questioned some of these prosecutors very sharply over those 2 issues, whether or not it was appropriate to call 5 other accusers. In my view, that was appropriate. What was a closer call was that Bill Cosby said he had an agreement that he would never be charged in exchange for testifying. The court was very sharp in its questioning on that particular issue. And remember that Bill Cosby has always maintained his innocence. Last year, his parole was denied in large part because he refused to participate in a treatment program for sex offenders and maintaining at that time his innocence. So although in 2018 he was found guilty of 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault, with this ruling, it is as if he is certainly not a guilty man, and he will be a free man today.
And that is undoubtedly just echoing across the country. I want to go to Lindsay Davis, who's covered this case, on 2 questions. First, Lindsay, what happens next here for Bill Cosby? And second, just reflect for a moment on this saga, one of the most popular entertainers in American history, a pioneer crossing and breaking down the color line in so many ways, and then these women coming forward and describing a completely different person, being held accountable in the Justice Department, now going free. Lindsay?
Sure. Let me start with what I can tell you first is that I did have a conversation with Andrew Wyatt, who is Bill Cosby's publicist, and we talked at about 1 o'clock. He was on his way. He was already in Philadelphia, which is about a 20-minute drive to Elkins Park, Bill Cosby's suburban home there, where Andrea Constand had accused him of the sexual assault back in 2004. He was on his way from Philadelphia to Elkins Park to get a car to then go to the prison, which is in Collegeville, Pennsylvania. That's about a 48-minute drive from Elkins Park, at which time he said Bill Cosby would walk out with him a free man. And so at that time, he said that it was within a matter of hours that would be taking place. Again, this is a man who had said that he was not going to, that he was prepared to serve out the 10 years because he was not going to admit at any time during any of the parole opportunities, he was not going to admit any wrongdoing. So he was prepared to serve the 10 years. And now walking out as an 83-year-old just 12 days before his 84th birthday. And Andrew Wyatt said that he was in Philadelphia because he had heard that the court was about to make a decision and that it seemed that the district attorney in the case had come to some desperation because there all of a sudden were these fines against Bill Cosby. And Andrew said that he was on his way to the office in Philadelphia to make these payments. There were these 6 fines that were issued against Cosby on June 25th, 2 of them because the accumulation of brush and overgrowth of grass at his Elkin Park property had gotten too high. And so he, again, similar to Brian McMonagle, the attorney for Bill Cosby in his first trial, his reaction was, wow, can you believe it? He had said all along he felt this was going to be the outcome, but they've been saying that at numerous points throughout this case. I think that they may be, those who are in the legal field as well, who did watch the Supreme Court hearing several months ago, may not be shocked. They were saying that this is the outcome they were expecting, not only that they'd hoped for, but that they are calling this justice today. Of course, many of the accusers and others in the world of public opinion likely feel differently.
Thank you for that, Lindsay. And just once again, to get to the why. Why is this happening? And that's because a previous prosecutor, Bruce Castor, was actually one of President Trump's lawyers in the impeachment trial, you may remember him, had determined in looking at the accusations against Bill Cosby that a criminal trial was unlikely, but he wanted to help plaintiffs in civil cases. And so he used his authority as a prosecutor and in a series of conversations with Bill Cosby and his lawyers said, look, I'm not interested in prosecuting you. I do think you should answer some questions, though. And so Cosby came in and answered questions. And what the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania says is, in accordance with the advice of his attorneys, Cosby relied upon District Attorney Castor's public announcement that he would not be prosecuted. His reliance was reasonable, and it resulted in the deprivation of a fundamental constitutional right when he was compelled to furnish self-incriminating testimony, and it was used against him in this prosecution by a future prosecutor. That's the problem, that there was this kind of loosey-goosey kind of conversation about, well, I'm not going to promise you. And I want to go to Dan Abrams, once again, our chief legal analyst on that. Dan, first, I mean, one of the things I think that is surprising to a lot of people is the notion of a non-prosecution agreement in a sexual assault case with the suspect. But it wasn't even a formal agreement. They're usually written down and signed. This was a kind of just series of conversations. The Supreme Court has said when you're dealing with constitutional rights, it matters what you tell a potential defendant, and that's why they overturned the decision. But I'll turn that over to you.
Yeah, I mean, look, the issue here is you have this previous DA making, as you pointed out, it's a bit of a loose agreement. But he was stating publicly at the time that part of the reason that he was doing this was so that Andrea Constant could get justice in this case, right? So she could pursue Cosby in the context of a civil case, and that therefore Cosby would not be able to invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination in the context of the civil case. And so he was saying, look, I have concerns about being able to get a conviction here based on the timing here, based on a number of factors. The DA didn't believe he'd be able to get a conviction. But he thought, let her have her day in court in the context of a civil case. And if I reach this agreement and say you're not going to be prosecuted, well, then any claim that he would have invoked of his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination becomes invalid because he's saying he's not going to prosecute. That's where the problems started to occur, right? That's where Bill Cosby says, okay, I then relied on those comments and agreed to testify in the civil case. And there is no doubt that the comments that Bill Cosby made in the context of that deposition were the most important pieces of evidence directly related to this incident, meaning the other women, you can argue, testified about other incidents were also very important. But the key testimony against Bill Cosby came from his own words in the context of this deposition. And so this was never a frivolous argument. I mean, look, I had always thought that it was troubling that the previous DA had made this agreement. And as you point out, there are real questions about why he would have done that. His explanation is the one that I just provided, but it is going to be deemed, I'm certain, as not a satisfactory one for many people.
And certainly not for the women who did come forward at great cost to themselves, their lives, their hearts and minds to tell their truth, speak their truth about what they say Bill Cosby did to them. And I want to go to Aaron Katersky on this saga for a final word here. This is, it seems like, the last chapter in the criminal investigation, prosecution, and now the overturning of the conviction of Bill Cosby.
This is not an exoneration when it comes to Bill Cosby's conduct with Andrea Constand, Terry, but the court did portray Bill Cosby himself as a victim of what the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court decision called a coercive bait and switch. So fundamental were his due process rights, and they were undercut, the court said, by the prosecutor's decision to bring charges after the prior DA decided not to prosecute, that Cosby is a victim, according to the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, of a coercive bait and switch. And the only remedy, the court said, is to release Cosby from custody after he served a little more than 2 years of his sentence, but also bar prosecution again on these same charges. So for all intents and purposes, Bill Cosby's home free.
And it is a shock. Thank you, Aaron, for putting that so succinctly. I want to bring in Gloria Allred, one of the preeminent lawyers in this field, a woman who has represented so many women and others who've come forward to speak their truth in this way, who represents many of the women who have come forward to accuse Bill Cosby. And Gloria Allred, thank you for being with us. What's your reaction?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Well, this decision by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court today to overturn the conviction of Bill Cosby, it must be devastating for Bill Cosby's many accusers, and my heart especially goes out to those who bravely testified in both of his criminal cases. I did represent a majority of the prior bad act accusers and witnesses who testified, and despite the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's decision, this was an important fight for justice, and even though the court overturned the conviction on technical grounds, it did not vindicate Bill Cosby's conduct, and it should not be interpreted as a statement or a finding that he did not engage in the acts of which he has been accused.
That is an excellent reminder. This is on a matter of law, not of fact. And Gloria, if I could just ask you, the significance of this case. The conviction is overturned, as Aaron tells us. The court has closed the door, and the statute of limitations has run on so many of these cases because they date back, 50-plus years. How is the significance of what all those women have accomplished coming forward? How much did this impact our country, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it has been an empowering experience for many of them to know that despite the bar that the statute of limitations placed on them, in other words, the statute of limitation is an arbitrary time period set by law, different in criminal cases, different in civil cases. But essentially, it's a time period that bars access to justice. But for many of them, being able to speak out, and also many of them went with me to the legislature in California, in Nevada, in Colorado, and we were successful in changing the law, in either eliminating the statute of limitations for criminal cases or extending the statute of limitations. So they have been the change they wish to see in the world. They have spoken truth to power, and I think they should be proud of themselves for having spoken out. By the way, I still have a pending civil case against Mr. Cosby that is awaiting a trial date in Santa Monica Superior Court, in LA County Superior Court in Santa Monica, and that is on behalf of my client who alleges that she was sexually abused as a child when she was at the Playboy Mansion with Bill Cosby and by Bill Cosby, and that's what her lawsuit alleges.
All right. The legal proceedings continue in that area, the civil side. The criminal cases are over. Gloria Allred, thank you for for that contribution and our understanding, really, of this remarkable American saga. We are going to return you to your regular programming, but just to underline, Pennsylvania's Supreme Court has overturned the criminal conviction of comedian Bill Cosby, who was convicted on sexual assault charges, served 2 years of a 3 to 10 year sentence. He is now that conviction overturned. He is expected to be released from prison and will not be able to be prosecuted again. A remarkable American saga, one of America's most popular entertainers for decades, exposed by a dozen scores of women coming forward as in their experience and what they said as a sexual predator, sentenced to prison, and now to be freed because his conviction has been overturned, because the court found that his rights against self-incrimination were violated by a deal struck by a previous prosecutor that was ignored by the prosecutor who brought the case that landed him in prison. Bill Cosby, his conviction overturned. We will return you to regular programming. We will continue our coverage of this on our streaming service, ABC News Live, so follow us there. I'm Terry Moran. Thanks for being with us.
Our thanks to Terry. Good afternoon. I'm Janae Norman. You've been watching breaking news coverage on ABC News, and we're going to continue that coverage as we have just learned that Pennsylvania's highest court has overturned Bill Cosby's sex assault conviction. The court said that they found an agreement with the previous prosecutor prevented Cosby from being charged in the case. We expect to see him leaving prison at some point later after serving more than 2 years of his sentence in state prison near Philadelphia. I want to bring in ABC News' Aaron Katursky for more on this. It is a very complicated situation here. Multiple cases against him, dozens of accusations. But, Aaron, you're just getting new information that it doesn't sound like Cosby is going to be released right this second. It's going to take some time.
It's not going to be this second, Janae, but he is, I'm told, going to be released today from prison. It's a matter of getting all the paperwork processed. The Pennsylvania Department of Corrections is in receipt of the proper paperwork. They're processing the paperwork, and I'm told that Bill Cosby will go free sometime today. It may take a little bit, but he is going to go free sometime today after serving about 2 years of a sentence that could have kept him in prison up to 10 years for the sexual assault of Andrea Constant.
And Aaron, talk to us a little bit more about how exactly this happened, because this went from a man who was convicted on these charges, who's now being painted as a victim by the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania.
It is just astonishing. He is being painted as a victim of what the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court called a coercive bait and switch. Bill Cosby, they said, was promised immunity by a prior prosecutor. Even if it wasn't specifically in writing, Cosby reasonably assumed that he was not going to be prosecuted. And when a subsequent district attorney decided to bring him up on these charges, that the court said was improper. Prosecutors have a lot of discretion, the decision said, but here they violated Bill Cosby's due process rights, and the only remedy, the decision said, was to let him go, and we understand he will be released sometime today, but also he cannot be prosecuted again on these charges.
Cannot be prosecuted again on these charges. Aaron Katursky, thank you so much, and I want to bring in ABC News legal contributor Dan Abrams on that point. Dan, the fact that he will not only be let out of prison, but cannot be prosecuted on these charges again, what does this mean for Bill Cosby going forward?
Look, this means that this is over for Bill Cosby. But what this does not mean is that Bill Cosby has been cleared, right? This is, when we talked to you, you questioned Aaron a moment ago about the court's reference to him as a victim, right? He's a legal victim, meaning they're not suggesting that, that he was a victim in the same way we would use the word to describe, of course, a woman who has been sexually assaulted. What they mean is that he was snookered, in effect, is what the court is saying. And the context of that is that he had not agreed yet to testify in the context of a civil lawsuit, and that the only reason that he ultimately agreed to testify in a civil lawsuit against him was because the prosecutor had assured his lawyers that he wouldn't be prosecuted. Because his position is, if they hadn't gotten that assurance, he would have then invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and he would not have testified in connection with the civil case. And let's be clear, his testimony in connection with the civil case was some of the most important evidence presented against him in the trial. So this is not a frivolous legal argument, but let's also be clear, this is not a statement by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that somehow these women weren't credible or that somehow this account wasn't credible. There's nothing about that to take away from this Pennsylvania Supreme Court opinion.
Dan Abrams, thank you so much. And important to note that this is not a declaration of Cosby's innocence, but this was his conviction being overturned on technical grounds, a matter of law, not fact. And on that note, I want to bring in our ABC News Live Prime anchor, Lindsay Davis. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us. You have covered this case for years. And when this news came out today, you and others close to the case were not surprised.
Well, you know, having watched the Pennsylvania Supreme Court hear this case several months back, they were grappling with, they were pushing back on the prosecution, basically asking a number of questions, not only with regard to this situation with Bruce Castor, the former district attorney who had made the verbal promise to Bill Cosby that he would never prosecute him, but also with regard to the prior bad acts witnesses and their involvement. And so at one point, they even kind of had chuckled among themselves when they had really pressed the prosecution with a question about, you know, their decision making. And so it really did seem, and I remember talking to a few colleagues after who had been, you know, kind of in the trenches covering this with me, like, wow, it really sounds like they're going to overturn this at the time. And again, that was months ago. I do want to go back. I've gotten a statement now from Brian McMonigal, who was the attorney for Bill Cosby in his first trial that resulted in a hung jury. And he said, "We argued from the beginning that the DA made a promise that had to be honored. Today, it finally was." Earlier today, when I talked to him, he talked about how if Cosby had only had a bail pending appeal, he never would have served a day in prison, and he felt that that was the right outcome. That would have been the right outcome. He feels that this is justice delayed at this particular point in time, simply because, as it has been described by Dan Abrams, that this was a promise, that it was binding. Bruce Castor was one of the first witnesses that Cosby's team called in that first trial, and he made lots of explanations for why he really felt that he was helping Andrea Constand, because he felt that she was not a credible witness. He felt that a case would not result in a conviction at that time for Bill Cosby. Again, this is well before the Me Too movement, going back to 2004. But he said that he was helping her out by allowing him to have this deposition that would ultimately reward her in a civil case, that she would be able to get millions of dollars, which she ultimately did in a civil case between her and Cosby. And he felt that it would be a more appropriate decision for this to play out in civil courts rather than in criminal courts.
And Lindsay, you saying there that within the Cosby camp, feelings of justice delayed, this news coming just 12 days before Bill Cosby's 84th birthday. And I want to bring in our senior national correspondent, Terry Moran. Terry, the story of Bill Cosby is a long, difficult one. It is hard to imagine a greater fall from grace than Bill Cosby.
Absolutely, Jenna. For somebody my age, excuse me, I'm 61 years old. I remember Bill Cosby from a TV show called I Spy, where he was really the first spectacular black actor on network television. And it was a great, fun show, and he was fun and charismatic and riveting. And then he went on to stand-up comedian stardom. And then, of course, in the 1980s, he was America's dad. You know, my own wife says that he was her image of what a dad could be. He had a huge hand in shaping that show because he wanted to show the country what black fathers could, what black families were like, and to show that they fit right into that kind of crazy idealistic notion that sitcoms have of what the American family is. The Cosby family was the American family. And that is an achievement, a cultural achievement that we really shouldn't undersell. It was a remarkable breaking down of a color barrier that we are still hammering away at. And he did it. And then, all those years later, there were rumors out there, and it was one comedian who made a joke that went viral, and women started coming forward. And in their testimony, in their truth, told at great cost to themselves, and with great courage, a different image emerged. He is, in their experience, as they tell us, a predator, a monster. Staggering numbers. Up to more than 60 women have come forward to allege a very similar pattern of conduct. Abusive and creepy and violent in some instances. That is what the allegations are. And then he went through the trial and imprisoned, and now this overturning of a conviction on constitutional grounds. I think people will reckon with it that way. I would like to say one thing going through this enormous opinion. There's a reason in the criminal law in particular, but that you want to dot every I and cross every T, because people's rights are at stake. People's lives are at stake. Justice is at stake for victims, for the defendant, for the community. And good prosecutors go slowly and go precisely. And when you read how Bruce Castor, the district attorney at the time, later President Trump's attorney in the second impeachment, did this, it was a series of conversations. You couldn't quite figure out whether or not he really meant that I'm not going to prosecute you. Is it a non-prosecution agreement, an immunity agreement? And the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania says you can't play with people's constitutional rights that way. Bill Cosby reasonably relied on whatever you were trying to do, on what you told him that you wouldn't prosecute him. And in this country, we don't prosecute people based on their own self-incriminating testimony. And that is why this is a bedrock constitutional matter, but it's also really an indictment of the way this prosecution was handled. But at the end of the day, just the latest chapter, not the final chapter, in an astonishing and remarkable historic American story, the story of Bill Cosby in our culture.
An important note there, Terry Moran, not the final chapter, but yet another chapter. And I want to bring our legal analyst, Dan Abrams, back in one more time, because, Dan, for anyone at home listening to this could sound like a lot of legal jargon. But just to cut through that, the takeaway for folks at home, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is not saying that Bill Cosby is innocent. They are not saying that he did not do the things he was accused of. They're simply overturning his conviction because of a legal technicality.
Right. They're saying the process was unfair, that Bill Cosby was treated improperly and unfairly by the judicial system. That says nothing about the credibility of the women who came forward. And, of course, when you look at this outside of the judicial arena, and you say that in the second case, remember, there was a mistrial, and then there was a second case where he was convicted, where 5 women testified. There were many more than 5 outside of the judicial arena who talked about improper, at the very least, conduct by Bill Cosby. So, I am certain that there are going to be, some in the Cosby camp who will claim that this is somehow an exoneration of him. This is not. This is a decision that the legal system treated him improperly and unfairly, and as a result, that the conviction must be overturned. But remember, in our legal system, appellate courts typically aren't deciding the facts, right? They're not going back and saying, did the jury do the right thing or not? The appellate courts are going and saying, did the judge do the right thing? Were the legal decisions that were made here fair? What, of course, makes this so striking is that in most cases, someone would get a new trial and they could be retried. In the context of this case, Bill Cosby cannot be retried and the case is over.
Dan Abrams, thank you so much. And to Dan's point, that some in Cosby's camp close to Bill Cosby will see this as an exoneration. We're just getting word from Felicia Rashad, who played Claire Huxtable alongside Bill Cosby for so many years, tweeting out, finally, a terrible wrong is being righted. A miscarriage of justice is corrected. Sure to be strong feelings on both sides, but at the end of the day, 12 days before Bill Cosby's 84th birthday, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania ruling that that his conviction on sex crimes will be overturned and Bill Cosby will be heading home. We'll have continuing updates right here on ABC News Live throughout the day and a complete wrap-up at 3 p.m. Eastern on The Breakdown, where I'll be joined again by Terry Moran, and tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern on ABC News Live Prime with Lindsay Davis. Thank you for joining us. I'm Janae Norman. Have a great day.